So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and today we are talking to Wendy Cicchetti again. But our subject will not be astrology today. We are going to talk about Mormonism and why Wendy left. So, Wendy, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Wendy, were you born into a Mormon family?
Yes, absolutely. I was born, and my parents were, well, actually, my father was born in the polygamy colonies in Mexico, Colonial Dublin, Chihuahua, Mexico. Now, his parents were not involved in polygamy. My grandmother's sister was, but they weren't. But my father lived in Colonial Dublin until he was 16. And my father chose to kind of climb the church ladder for power in this life. And, he got up there pretty high. And my grandfather was up there pretty high. He was a lovely man. But I first want to say, you know, I know there are a lot of good people in the Mormon church. Okay. I have no fault with the people, the pure people. It's the hierarchy. It's the structure. And that's what I had a problem with, And so as I answer questions, know that I'm just answering what I understand the doctrine to be, not how I necessarily feel about it, unless I interject that, and say this is bullshit. But
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you just said put in the polygamy what?
polygamy colonies. See,
Okay, but officially the church banned polygamy in 1890.
but
So,
it didn't, that was in the United States.
oh,
There were polygamy colonies in Mexico that
mhm,
actually lasted for quite some time.
yeah.
Yeah. And my dad was,
And Mexico had no trouble
no,
with that?
mm-mm,
No.
no. So
Uh-huh.
it's just here in the United States. Yeah. That's where they were getting the flack about it, was here in the US, not in other countries.
Uh-huh. And is it then safe to assume that this polygamy thing is going on in other countries as well?
Yes.
Or have they?
But not sanctioned by the church. Now, back then, um, it was sanctioned. But now the polygamy colonies are not sanctioned.
Okay.
And they have a lot of polygamy groups in the United States that are not sanctioned by the church. No, they're called apostates. They've gone off into their own thing.
Okay, so they are basically like a rogue group.
Yes.
Uh-huh. And the Mormon Church itself does no longer acknowledge them.
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, now I understand. And when did that split happen?
I'm not sure exactly. I think when things ended in Mexico, and I'm not sure exactly when that was, um, that they kind of disbanded it. But there were a lot of really good people in Mexico who were still practicing in 1890. And I'm trying to think, my father was born in, 1920 something, and there was still polygamy going on where he was born at
Mhm.
that time. Yeah.
So as a child, I mean, Mormons usually they, yeah, focus on strong families, family life that you have. Not that the entire family, is torn apart and everybody uses the house just like a hotel. Yeah. So I would assume that as a child, that was a good thing to grow up.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, because the church pushes families to be together. And my parents tried the best that they could to keep us together. My dad had a cabin and we went on vacations and we took other church members and kids with us. And we had, a fairly fun childhood. What wasn't fun was the church indoctrination. And my mother was raised by what we call a Mormon Nazi. And this poor woman who had been married to what we call a Jack Mormon, someone who doesn't go to church. He smoked and drank and did all that stuff and was a traveling salesman. And he came home one time and was with the kids and babysitting. And when she came home, he was in bed with them. So all of my mother's brothers and sisters, there were my mom and her sister were all sexually abused by their father. And so she became very paranoid. She had a nervous breakdown and lived with our family for a long time. And she was horrible. And she hated me and abused me as a child. But it was just because she was a loony bird, It wasn't that that's what the church said to do, And so part of those things, of course, stick with you when you're a child. And you grow up with that kind of mental and emotional abuse. Now, my parents were as a lot of Mormon families are, they're very dictatorial about keeping the laws, keeping the rules. And so what typically ends up happening is stifling creativity, stifling individuality. They don't come right out and say, you have to be just like everybody else, like what I call Stepford children or Stepford wives. And so I'm the only one of my 7 brothers and sisters. There were 8 of us of the 7 other siblings that took off and did something on my own, that left the church and said, this is nonsense. And, but all my other brothers and sisters are still Stepford people. It's like, sometimes I feel like they have no soul. It's just all obey this and obey that. And, don't think for yourself. That was the other thing I grew up with, which is the brethren, the heads of the church, are perfect. Don't question them. Don't question authority. Don't question the president of the church, because they are prophets, seers, and revelators, and they will tell you what to do. They will tell you what to think. And, I had a real hard time with that. A real struggle.
Yeah.
That's how I was raised. Okay. And that this is the only way to get to heaven. And we are the only church that is true. And I know there are other churches that say the same thing. So
all of them, all religions say that.
It's not unique to Mormonism, but when you're in it and you're a child, you develop a lot of fear and a lot of guilt, and you do things out of fear and guilt rather than doing them because it's a heart-centered thing, And my mother was a Stepford wife, no question about that, So it's a patriarchal society, and I don't believe in that. One of the things I went, no, I'm not interested in this good old boys network. No.
So in other words, you are the only one of those siblings that left?
Yes.
So the other ones are still in?
Yes. It's very, very difficult to leave the Mormon church. It takes a lot of strength to do it. And part of it is because it is somewhat cult-like, and it's hard to leave that kind of environment. But my father always said, Wendy's the strongest member of my family. And I was strong enough to finally leave. It took me a while for all the old tapes to quit running and to develop and find my individuality and what I believed in. And but I'm free of it, to the extent that I don't have any triggers with it anymore. It's like whatever.
So when you leave, is it, I have some experiences with the Jehovah's Witnesses because from my mother's side, there were a lot of witnesses. And is it that, for instance, Jehovah's Witnesses, once you leave the organization, they no longer talk to you. Yeah, even fathers, mothers, yeah, they stop talking to their children. Nobody from the congregation would greet you on the street if they see you. And so, how is that? Is that a problem as well?
No, it's not the same. It has become more of a problem in these last 20 years, especially with the gay issues. There have been a lot of people who've, thrown their gay children out and then never spoken to them and stuff like that again. But no, what happens when you decide to leave the Mormon church, and I'll tell you my experience. I decided that I wanted to leave. I'd had it, had some negative experiences, and so I petitioned my bishop to have my records removed from the church. Well, I got a knock at the door one night, and the bishop came with his counselors, and he said, "We're here to determine whether or not you are a candidate to have your records removed." It's like, what the hell? I said, "Excuse me, I don't have any feelings that you have any jurisdiction over me. I don't believe that you're over me. And, I want my records removed." And, he got all huffy and, well, we're the ones that, and I just gave him so much flack. He said, "All right, I think you're right. It is time for your records to be removed." And he left the house in a huff. And so, I got a letter that the records had been removed. What I found out later, because I had a really good friend who worked in the family history department, and she said, "They never remove your records. They just put them in another place. But your records are never removed." So that was all a lie.
Mm-hmm. Is that what other people call to get off the books?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So is it true that the reason why they keep you on the books is that they firmly believe um, that the moment you are being removed from the records, that will, yeah, subdue you to the second death?
It's never talked about in that regard. No.
Okay.
Um, it, and I don't think that that's why they do it. I think it's actually the opposite, which is they want you there just in case you do decide to come back, because you have to remember Mormons are an elitist society, and they believe their doctrine is the true doctrine. And so that at some point that individual will come to their senses and come back to the fold, and then they'll have all your records and they can just bring them back. But it doesn't
Okay.
have anything to do about a second death. I've never heard that concept before.
Mhm. Yeah, I heard that. I listened to. He is a evangelical pastor now, and he used to be a Mormon, and he has been fighting for more, I guess, more than 2 years to get off the books. And then they explained that to him in that way. So I don't know what's really going on there.
Yeah, I don't either. They're, like I say, they're very elitist. They feel entitled information to make sure that they've done everything for your salvation. That's basically what it's for. And I've never heard anybody come out and formally say, "We never take your records off." Until
Yeah,
my
yeah.
friend told me, who's in on the inside. And she
Mm,
said there have been times where people, working there would go in and actually remove it from the other location, you know. But
mm.
here's the deal that I think. If the Mormon church is not true, why are you even worried about it?
Yeah.
Superfluous, whether they have your information or not. if it's not true, why care? If you don't believe it, why even care? Just, one of the things though that happens, because again, that they feel that they are entitled because of who they are, they do continue to call you. They do continue to send missionaries over for your children. I had them coming over to my house all the time because they wanted to latch on to my children. And I said, I'm sorry, we're not interested. Please do not come back. My children aren't interested. I'm not interested. Well, after the fourth time, when they came to the door, I went out and I picked up the hose and I said, you see this hose? If you guys come again, I will squirt you. Don't ever come here again. I said, don't you guys have, phones or any kind of sophisticated communication that you can tell everybody that these people aren't interested? And they never came back after that.
Okay. So when you say they do everything for your salvation, what
Yes.
exactly is it that you need to be saved from?
Well, it's not so much what you need to be saved from, it's what you need to be saved for. You need to be saved for your eternal salvation, your getting to the celestial kingdom, the highest degree of the 3 degrees of glory. And within the celestial kingdom, there are 3 degrees there as well. And so, in order for you to do that, and of course, they feel all of that's true, that they're trying to save you from a lower kingdom, and they want you to follow the procedures that are important, which are baptism into the church, which is paying your tithing, critical. The other one is going to the temple and doing what they call the endowments, and being married for time and all eternity. These are critical if you want to achieve the celestial kingdom.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
we will dive into that
later.
subject a little bit later on. You already talked about abuse in families. I know for a fact that, I'm pretty sure all religions have problems with abuse and especially child abuse. I know, for instance, that, again, Jehovah's Witnesses, if you come forward as a teenager, as a child, and you report a sexual abuse, the way they are dealing with it, they do not call the police, first of all, which they should do. Yeah. And they have this rule that if you accuse somebody, you need to have 2 witnesses, meaning you need a second witness, to confirm your allegations. So, I mean, what child has witnesses to its abuse? Yeah, how ridiculous is that? And not only that, when they go from door to door, sometimes that abused individual ends up with the abuser because the one who is leading, and says, yeah, okay, here are the groups, you go with him, you go with her, and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so then they have to do service with their own abuser. This is outrageous. And that is one of the reasons why I cannot respect that organization. So how was that handled with the Mormon Church?
Now, I don't know, clear back in the 50s when my father was sexually abusing his children. I don't know what happened to that. In fact, my mother would never even admit it. It was her sister that admitted it. It wasn't my mother. My mother was so traumatized by it but she was always very sexually paranoid when we were growing up. But so I don't know if even then in the church it was an issue, not like it is today. And one of the reasons that I left the Mormon church is because I saw inconsistencies about how they would handle crimes by men versus crimes by women, or perceived crimes. How men would get free passes with things. Okay, check in with us. Let's make sure you're doing things right. And if a woman spoke up and criticized, they were much harsher on the women than they were on the men. Now, like I say, I never experienced the sexual abuse, but I did experience my father, who was high up in the church, calling and talking to my bishop behind my back about my children. And that's what I mean about this good old boys network. And then my bishop actually, saying, well, have you straightened out things with your dad? And I was like, I didn't tell you about that. How did you know about that? Did you talk to my father? So there was this network, this what they call the priesthood network, where all the guys talk with each other behind the person's back to determine how they're going to handle things. And but the sexual abuse issues, I understand what you said, that there is some of that stuff, and I think there is always a protection of men.
Yeah. So another interesting question to me is always, how do they finance themselves? We have reports that they have invested very early on, Coca-Cola, Safeway, and what have you, and that in terms of liquidity, that they are one of the richest organization that there is. So what do you know about that?
Well, they take 10%.
Oh,
If
okay.
you're a Mormon, you pay 10% of your income. And this is gross income. You pay 10% of
So
your,
before taxes.
or taxes, you pay 10% of that to the church. That's kind of like buying your way into heaven, in my view. But beyond the tithing, there are the investments. Now, I know in Salt Lake City, they were highly invested in a company called ZCMI, which was a retail outlet where we would all go and spend our money and buy our fancy clothes and all that stuff. And, but yes, Coca-Cola was one, Safeway, and a whole bunch of others. I know, based on a whistleblower 2 or 3 years ago, that the Mormon Church has in reserve over $100 billion. Now, this guy worked in the finance department of the church. He was absolutely incredulous when he found out that, and he went to the press about it. But of course, the press, which is basically owned by the Mormon Church in Utah, it was squashed. It was out one time, maybe a couple times, and then it was done. And so they do have a lot of money. They were asked, how come and why have you amassed all of that money? And their answer was, we are saving it for when the Savior comes again, so we can help all the people.
What does that even mean?
I don't know, in their mind.
Okay.
In other words, they're thinking if there's going to be some kind of an apocalyptic event, or, the systems will crash. And one thing I do know, even though it is a process, there are hoops you have to jump through, is the Mormons' welfare system. Now, they own factories, they own, meat and cattle and all of that stuff. They have a canning thing where they can all kinds of foods. And so they have what's huge, you would consider huge, in their storehouses. And there were a couple of times when I was in financial struggle raising my 7 children and trying to pay my tithing, and telling the bishop, I just don't have, he said, you pay me your tithing and then I'll give you a requisition and you can go to the storehouse and, get the things you need for free. And I went through that for a few times to help me through a hard time raising teenagers and,
Yeah.
But that's how they handled it. You have to pay us the 10%. If you want your temple recommend, if you want to be able to go to the temple And if you want to secure your eternal salvation, you have to pay your tithing.
Yeah. But I'm just asking myself, how do they even know how much you are making? You know, do you have to disclose your, yeah, your,
Yeah.
uh,
At the first of the year, every year, or the end of the year, the bishop calls everybody in for what's called tithing settlement. And you have to tell him your income, and you have to agree or swear that you've paid a full tithing.
okay. So in other words, he does not really read um,
Not the
your,
documents, not your W-2s. He doesn't require a W-2. He
yeah,
requires
okay.
an honest assessment.
Okay. Um, but I guess that the fear of doing something horribly wrong is strong enough that people, yeah, okay, that is how it works.
Yeah, it's a strong incentive to be honest, to pay a full and honest tithing. If you want to go to the temple, and the temple is like critical, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to go to that temple and do the endowment ceremony and be married for time and all eternity and all, I mean, that's a critical part of the Mormon uh, incentive program.
Yeah, okay. So if you had to boil it down for us, what would you say is the core belief of the Mormon Church?
Well, what makes them unique, of course, is the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
The Book of Mormon is an account um, that was that was said to have been transcribed from golden plates by Joseph Smith with what's called a Urim and Thummim, whatever that is. And in that scripture, it tells about Jesus appearing to the Americas between the time he was crucified and the time he was resurrected. That period in there, he was purportedly prophesying to the Americans, to the Americas, the American Indians, and all of that. You know, you've heard the story of the Great White Hope and all of that kind of thing that American Indians talk about. So that's what sets Mormonism apart from other religions, is that Jesus came and taught the gospel to the American Indians.
Mm-hmm.
And they have different names for them. Like they talk about the Lamanites, and these are all references to different tribes, the Lemuelites, you know, the prophets Lehi and the prophet Nephi. And it tells this whole story of, you know, doing what's right and then pride and it falls, and then doing what's right and pride and then it falls. It sounds, you know, it's the normal thing that the whole everybody's done throughout history. And
Mm-hmm.
pride cometh before the fall. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what sets the Mormon church apart in terms of doctrine, is the Book of Mormon. And I've read it a couple of times. Also, Joseph Smith is also purported to have gotten scripture, and one is called the Pearl of Great Price, which is considered Mormon scripture. The other one is called the Doctrine and Covenants.
Mm-hmm.
And those were scriptures that were apparently or said to be given them by God.
Mm-hmm. So let me see if I have this straight. Jesus dies in, yeah, what we call
Jerusalem, or
Palestine, yeah. And then he appears in the Americas, but in flesh and blood.
yes.
And
You know,
how,
I don't know whether it is flesh and blood. Don't hold me to that. I don't really remember whether he came as more like an apparition. I
okay.
don't remember. It's been a while since I read that account. But he did appear to them and they knew who he was. So in
How?
what form, I'm not quite sure. I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting to figure out how the Native Americans knew that, yeah, this is Jesus, because I'm pretty sure that what happened there in Palestine didn't make the rounds to the Americas.
Well, that's the account. That is
Okay.
literally the crux, the thesis of the Book of Mormon is that that's what happened, and then everything takes off from there.
Okay. So, and now what is it important because I don't know. I have never been to a Mormon meeting or anything, but my impression is that they value the Book of Mormon more than the Bible itself. Is that impression correct?
You know, that's an interesting hypothesis there as well. They're very strong on the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants, and it comes right all in a grouping with the Book of Mormon. But yet they really do push the Bible. And I took several courses in the New Testament, and when you read the Old Testament, actually the church is set up in the form that Moses put together the children of Israel. I did the same type of thing, and also how from the New Testament, how Jesus created, the 12 apostles, Jesus created his group of disciples and that kind of thing. So they did take the formation of the church based on biblical records. However, I don't see anywhere where anybody told Joseph Smith, you should start a church. you
Yeah.
know there's no place that I can see or that ever read where Jesus said, okay, now you take this and you start a church.
Mhm. Mhm. So, in other words, when you say according to the Old Testament, are we talking about tribes?
Well, in the Mormon, what Moses did with the tribes of Israel, he said, okay, they're going to be leaders that are going to take care of this many people, and then there are leaders up here that are going to take these groups of people, and leaders up here that are going to take those groups of people. Well, that's how the Mormon Church is structured. So, a bishop, and my father was a bishop, it's over a few hundred people. Then above him is the stake president, and he has these wards. The bishop is in charge of a ward. He has maybe 4 or 5 wards that he's in charge of. And then above him is called a regional representative, and he may have stake that he's in charge of. And then from there you go to the council of 70, and then from there you go to the council of the 12, and then you have the president and his 2 counselors above that. So it's from small groups of people governed by one, and then to larger groups, and then larger groups and larger groups. And that's basically how Moses instructed the children of Israel to govern themselves.
Mhm. When I was still flying as a flight attendant, there was a time when I was constantly in Los Angeles. I had a lot of friends there, and so one day somebody told me that the Mormons are very involved also in Hollywood, and that Robert Redford started his career by marrying into a Mormon family. Do you know anything about that? Is that even true?
I don't know if there were inner designs about that. I do know there are some Mormons. Of course, we have the Osmond family, but also George Lucas was Mormon. I don't think he's an active Mormon, but I think his roots are in Mormonism. And so I will say that, again, these are just people in the Mormon church. They're not part of the hierarchy. And so I
Okay.
do think they try and do good. And anybody with the evil that's in Hollywood that would stay there
Yeah,
to
yeah.
me, pedophilia and the
Mhm.
Satanism and all of that stuff, if you're a good religious person, no matter what religion, you don't want to be a part of that. But people succumb to money. They succumb to wealth and to power and to being visible and having all that fame. And so I think that turns a lot of people, no matter how innocently you start out.
Yeah.
Human nature, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I mean, Scientologists, they are pretty big in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And so I thought I ask Wendy if there might be something to that.
Well, yeah. And Scientology, of course, is a cult too.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. So, no, let's put it this way. How does the being a Mormon affect your everyday life?
well, you're given rules, of course, to live by.
Mm-hmm.
One of those is called the word of wisdom. And that word of wisdom is, no coffee, tea, tobacco, alcohol. Okay, that's considered the word of wisdom. And they've included caffeine in that, but yet they were part of Coca-Cola, which is incongruent.
Yeah, yeah.
But anyway, you have the word of wisdom to live by, and then you're expected to live the commandments, the 10 commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you screw up in one of those, you're in trouble and you have to confess to your bishop. I hate that whole confession thing. You have to go in and confess your sin to the bishop, and then the bishop judges you as to what punishment there may be. Okay. And so, and this is what I saw a lot of, which is men would go in and confess their sins, and the Good Old Boy Network would say, oh, slap them on the wrist. But if a woman talked against the church, they would bring her in and they would say, we see that you're doing this. Are you going to repent? And if she said, no, it's what I believe, then they'd excommunicate her. So they have a couple of procedures. They can disfellowship a person. And bear in mind that this stuff is announced in church.
Yeah, yeah. That's the same with the witnesses. Mm.
Yeah. Okay, this person's been disfellowshipped, or
Mm-hmm.
this person's been excommunicated, and to shame people and to let everybody know that that person's out of the main congregation, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, you can't take the sacrament. Like at every church meeting, you're given bread and water, you're given the sacrament, and there are specific prayers for the bread and specific prayers for the water. But if you've been disfellowshipped or you've been excommunicated, you can't partake of those things.
Mm-hmm. How horrible. Okay, so what I was really a little bit puzzled by when you said living by the 10 Commandments. I remember that, I don't know which letter of Paul that was, but I remember that he said that Jesus is the end of the Mosaic law because his sacrifice fulfilled all the laws, and that the blood of oxen and and whatever can never reach to that level. So why are they insisting on living the 10 Commandments? Because no, they think they are Christians, right? Okay, yeah, but no Christian is actually required to live by the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, well, I can't speak to other religions. I'm just
Yeah,
saying that that's what Mormons believe, that you live the 10
yeah,
commandments. That
yeah.
that was never taken away as rules of conduct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I find that strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, because yeah, okay. We forget it. We just acknowledge
Acknowledge
they
that's
do.
the way it is, right?
Mhm. So is it, let's say, Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, they do not want you to have worldly friends, meaning friends outside of the congregation. So how do Mormons view that? Is that do they warn you against, company with worldly people?
Well, it's done in a different way.
Mhm.
It's not, they don't come out and say it, but parents are like, I don't want you playing with that person. I don't want you associating with that person, And so as we're growing up, they have youth programs and that kind of thing where they keep all the youth together, doing activities and that kind of thing, and playing with other children that are not Mormons is kind of frowned upon. Other religions do the same thing. But I've never heard anybody come out and say, don't associate with people who aren't in the church.
Mhm.
It's more like something that's implied, not something that's doctrine.
Okay, so in other words, we keep you busy so that you do not have time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, it's natural. You are at school, you go to work, of course you meet other people. Yeah, and okay, I understand. So, how many meetings are there per week?
Well, back when, I was in the church, the meetings were on Sunday, and then when you went on Sunday, you had sacrament meeting and you had priesthood meeting for the men, and you had Relief Society for the women and Sunday school for the children. And then during the week, then you would have what was called mutual, which was for the children. Okay. So those were the basic things of meetings. And then in the last few years, they've consolidated it more. Okay.
Mhm.
And they've lessened the time for each one. They've shortened things, and everybody just goes on Sunday and does XYZ, and that's pretty much it. Um, I left the church in 89. So that's been a long time. That's like 30 years that I've been away from it. Now, I do have friends that are in the church that talk to me and tell me what's going on. I don't often retain it all. I just know that things are shifting. This fellow who is president of the church now, Russell Nelson, interestingly enough, he dated my mother. They were at BYU together before she met my father at BYU. But anyway, he has been in effect like Trump was, which is
Mhm.
kind of shaking things up. I never did like this, he would say, and so I'm going to do it this way. So he's been kind of a shaker upper.
Mhm.
Um, some people were real upset at him, because he was changing some traditional things. It's my understanding that this is what was going on. But they still consider him a prophet, seer, and revelator. And so they do exactly what they say. And, twice a year, they have in the conference, they hold what's called General Conference in Salt Lake City. And in that conference, you have to raise your hand to the square and support and sustain the president and the brethren as prophets, seers, and revelators.
Mhm.
And then once you do that, it's up to you to obey what they say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what if you start to become irregular in terms of attending the meetings? Is there somebody that says, yeah, we should send somebody there and take extra good care of that member, or
Well,
is
they
it
do
frowned
that.
upon?
Yeah, for women, they have what's called the visiting teachers who go
Mm.
out to families, and they will do that. They will, um, how are you doing? What can we do to help you? I mean, they're very genuine in their approach. I've had visiting teachers come to my house before, and they're just lovely women in the church that are just trying to help you, you know, and
Mm.
it's not anything negative. But when a person says they're a Mormon and smokes and drinks and, all of those kinds of things, drinks coffee, they're considered what's called a Jack Mormon. In other words, they don't follow the teachings, but they still say, oh yeah, I'm a Mormon. But attending the meetings on a regular basis doesn't necessarily classify you as a Jack Mormon. Okay. Maybe you're somebody who travels. Maybe you have health issues. Maybe you're just not a social person. But as long as you pay your tithing,
Okay.
you pay your tithing and you go to the temple when you can, and you've been baptized, then it's not that big a deal. They're going to, send the visiting teachers or some of the priesthood people out if it's a man and say, how can we help you? What's going on? But there's not an ostracization, what's the right word? They don't ostracize you for not doing it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then that's a big difference also between Jehovah's Witnesses. And I mean that is you have the Sunday meeting that is 2 hours, and then you have one during the week that is 2 hours, and you have another meeting during the week that is 1 hour.
Way too much for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they still do it that way. I don't check on a regular basis what they are up to, but that is how it used to be. So I have to come back to this one question with the Ten Commandments. Okay, Jesus himself said that there is actually only two laws. Love your God with all your heart, and the next
is love thy neighbor.
Love thy neighbor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that is what Paul picked up and said, yeah, this is what Jesus taught, and that is the end of the Ten Commandments. So since the Mormons are still following the Ten Commandments, what is actually the role of Jesus in this belief structure?
Well, one of the things that Jesus did is he created the Beatitudes, which were the Beatitudes. And those were, blessed are the meek, for they shall see God. Do you remember the Beatitudes? So that's something you could look up. That's one thing that he gave the people were the Beatitudes, which were a higher law, And but I was always under the that was in addition to the Ten Commandments. It wasn't separate. It was in addition to them. We're not taught that the Ten Commandments are now null and void. It's honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days will be long upon the land, keep the Sabbath day holy, and it goes on and on. No other gods before me, no graven images, and thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. I mean, to me, those are things that are just basic. We know that if we do it, especially stealing or killing or adultery, there's consequences.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it just makes sense that you would want to continue to not do those things because there are natural consequences associated.
Yeah, but you could also say, if you pick up what Jesus said, love thy God, and then if you really love your neighbor, then you will not rob him. Then you will not, steal his wife, or you will not hurt his children, and so on. And so meaning, if you understand the essence of that, what he said, you do not need to have all these, extra laws where now here I'm telling you specifically what not to do.
Well, you have to understand people are pretty dense.
Okay.
And most people don't know the power of true love. I mean, how many people do you know that love unconditionally? I mean, so Jesus is trying to tell you, you got to learn how to do that. How many people know how to do that? So you got these backup laws for all of those people, including myself at times, who don't understand, who don't know what perfect love is. Like backup, in my view. The learning to love and learning to be a better person is pretty much wrapped up in the Beatitudes. Okay. That goes a little further, a little deeper, but still, look at the earth today. Is there love on this earth? No. And that's what Jesus was trying to get us to do, is to love one another. Talks about that in John, but people don't know how. So we need the backup. Thou shalt not steal, shalt not kill, shalt not commit adultery,
Yeah, I don't know. Either Jesus is at the end of the Mosaic law or he is not. I personally, I'm wired like that. I cannot have it both ways. Either I try to make an effort and understand the essence of the law that Jesus gave with these two laws, God and the neighbor. Or I do not make an effort and I stay stuck in,
Well, now, who is defining the Mosaic law? What is that definition? Is it just how he was with the children of Israel, where he said, you can't do this and you can't do that, and you have to sacrifice this and you have to sacrifice that, and you have to
it didn't only consist of the 10 commandments. It had more than 600 commandments and let's say recommendations. And that was a very, very
very rigid.
In other words, it was not possible to keep it. That is how convoluted and how it was difficult.
Just recently I've reread the book of Exodus, and all of the laws that the people of the children of Israel were given they were like so strict, far beyond what we would do in this day and age. But to me, just in my own way of thinking, I can't envision that God would take away the 10 commandments because they're just common sense. You see what I'm saying? Now, all of the other...
I know what you mean, and you are correct. But then as we develop, then you can do away with all these 600 plus recommendations and commandments. And then finally let the people know, hey guys, actually, if you understand these two statements, then you do not need the rest. You will do the correct thing via autopilot.
Yes, you'll govern yourself.
Yeah.
But I go back to the fact, how many people in this world today do you know that understands that kind of love?
But that is not but even with the 10 commandments,
people are still up in the night most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So but we digressed a little bit, so because I got stuck on the 10 commandments. And but how would you characterize the role of Jesus in the Church of Mormons?
Well, the Mormon Church is very Christ-centered.
Okay.
And again, we have this multiplicity of things that Christ did that Mormons believe that other churches don't. So they are very Christ-centered. And, I grew up from the time I was little, it was all about Jesus. You say your prayers to God in the name of Jesus. I mean, that was, and of course, that's all biblical as well. So there's not a conflict in my view in terms of the church in some way not believing in Jesus. No, they're very Christ-centered. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they see him as their savior.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Then we have that cleared up. Um, what I have noticed here in Germany, of course, I have met Mormons. Predominantly, they started a conversation just on the street, but it was always young men. I would say 19, 20, maybe 21. Is it only young men that go overseas, or how
No,
does that work?
it's very interesting, the missionary program. Now
Mm.
it used to be where it was just young men, and that they were, after out of high school, before they started college, they were called to serve a 2-year mission. And they would be called either into a place in the United States or to places in Europe and around the world. But now young women go.
Okay.
So both boys and girls go. I still think they're boys and girls when they're 18 and 19. I think it's awful young. But also, couples will go, older couples.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're retired, and so maybe they go off to another place and work in the temple, a temple there, or they'll, do work. So it doesn't matter so much age anymore. It's, do you have a desire to, quote, serve the Lord or to serve the church?
Yeah, I had almost the impression, because I always met these young men. I had this idea, yeah, maybe you have to do it to get up the ladder, yeah, to make a career in
Well,
the
it
church.
does, it's like a notch in your belt. Yeah, if you've served a mission. And you get interconnected with some of the hierarchy, the mission presidents and all of this stuff as you go. I know lots of young men, even within my family structure, who have started out going on one and went, no, this isn't for me, this is a numbers game and I'm not playing, and they've come home. There's a lot of that
What do
happen.
you mean when you say it's a numbers game?
Well, yeah, you got to keep up with the quota. You got to bring people in.
Ah, okay. Okay, I understand.
Yeah, the whole goal is, okay, we got to spread the kingdom. You got to have all these baptisms. You got to bring these people into the fold. And
Mhm.
it turns out to be a really strong pressure of a numbers game.
Yeah, yeah. And do they also do missionary work in their particular country as well? Let's say, usually the young men that I met, they came from the United States. So
Mhm.
my question is, do they also preach in the United States?
Oh, yes. And I think where they send them to depends on their aptitude sometimes.
Oh, okay.
When when they're called on a mission, say to go to Germany, and my brother was,
Uh-huh.
they send them to the missionary training school and to the language department, where they teach them. They have a fast course in teaching them how to speak German or
Mm.
French or whatever. And but missionaries that are called in the United States can go into the United States. I see them here in New Mexico all the time on their
Mhm.
bicycles with their little helmets and white shirts, And sometimes I feel bad for them. My thought is, maybe you should be getting an education. Of course, they're getting an education of a certain type, but um, it's what they've chosen to do. I think, from the time you're little, when you go to Sunday school, there are songs like, I hope they call me on a mission when
Mhm.
I have grown a year or two, you see. So it's indoctrinated into the children that that's the goal, is that you're going to go on a mission for the church.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say, is it really their choice, or have they been indoctrinated to believe that's what they have to do? And so when one graduates, another thing that really bugs me about what's been going on is it used to be the church would pay for the missionaries. They don't do that anymore. Here they have $100 billion, and a family sends one of their children on a mission. They got to come up with $500 or $600 a month to support that kid and on a mission. And I think that's terrible. I think it's way too much of a sacrifice, but
Yeah, I thought that they would be supported by the church. I mean, that's the least that you can do.
I would think.
Yeah, interesting. So, Wendy, our first hour is already gone, and we will take a short break, and then we will dive a little bit deeper in the second hour, and we see the patrons on the other side. Bye-bye.